My name is Sandra, and I was only 5 years old when my sister Maura was born. I remember that day as if it happened yesterday. Bright sunlight streamed through the curtains in our small living room, where I eagerly waited for my parents to return from the hospital. When they finally walked in, I noticed a tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket in my mom's arms. Maura. They named my sister after our grandmother, and even then, with just one glance at her, I felt that my life would never be the same again. My mom gently hugged me, kneeling down, and said words that would become the theme of my childhood. "You're a big sister now, and you need to help us get through this." I didn't fully understand what "get through this" meant, but the sense of responsibility for Maura was planted in me at that moment. Our home, modest but cozy, was located in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knew each other. My parents weren't wealthy. My dad worked as an accountant, and my mom as a secretary. They worked hard to provide us with everything we needed, and at first glance, it seemed to me that we really had everything. But as the years passed, I began to notice that the idea of enough meant different things to me and to Maura. When I turned 10 and Maura 5, the differences in how our parents treated us became particularly clear. One day, I accidentally broke a plate while washing dishes. My mom gave me a stern look and said my punishment would be a week without television and extra chores around the house. The next day, Maura was running around the house and accidentally knocked over Mom's favorite vase. "She's just a little girl," Mom said as she swept up the shards. "She doesn't understand." That was the first time I felt the sting of injustice. This pattern of behavior continued for years. I had to earn pocket money by doing chores, while Maura received it freely. If I wanted new clothes, I had to wait for special occasions, holidays, or my birthday. Maura, however, could simply point to a dress in a store window, and our parents would pull out their wallets immediately. My everyday life gradually turned into an endless cycle of caring for Maura. Mornings began with me helping her get ready for school, preparing breakfast, and checking if she had packed her lunch. After school, I rushed to pick her up, helped her with homework, made sure she had a snack, and found time to play with her to keep her entertained. But something new was growing inside me. Years of responsibility and submission gave rise to a desire to pursue my own dreams. My passion for drawing became a small corner of freedom where I could truly be myself. A brochure for an art camp, which I kept carefully tucked away, was more than just an opportunity to learn something new. It was a promise of a different world where I could feel valued and important. That May Day began like many others. I woke Maura up, checked her backpack, and sent her off to school. But in my heart, I felt joy. My efforts were finally paying off, and there were only 6 weeks left until the start of the camp. I had even received a partial scholarship, making my dream almost a reality. I just needed to save up the remaining amount. When Mom sent me a text reminding me to pick up Maura from school, I thought it was unnecessary. I had been doing it for years and knew her schedule like the back of my hand. But that day, everything went wrong. I got lost trying to find my way home. My parents' words burned in my ears like embers. "You're too careless." I tried to explain myself, but Dad interrupted me coldly and curtly. "We don't want to hear your excuses, Sandra. Your sister could have been hurt. She ended up on the other side of town because of your irresponsibility." I tried to remind them that the janitor had seen Maura leave with her friends, but Mom's voice drowned out my protests. "Go to your room and hand over your phone." Her face, usually kind, seemed like that of a stranger, as though anger had erased all its familiar features. "And you can forget about the summer camp," she added as I walked away. The camp I had dreamed of all year. Day after day, coin after coin, I had saved every bit of pocket money and taken on every chore to earn the remaining amount. But now it was all gone. "You should have thought about that before abandoning your sister," Mom added, her words cutting through the air like a knife. "Maybe this will teach you responsibility." I looked at Maura, sitting at the table, smirking behind a slice of pizza. That moment was a turning point. Everything I had done for her over the years, reading bedtime stories, buying gifts with my saved-up money, helping her with homework, all of it suddenly felt meaningless. She no longer felt like my sister. She was just someone who happened to live in the same house. That night, I finally severed the threads that bound us. I packed into a box all the games we used to play together, the drawings she had once given me, and an unfinished packet of her favorite candy that I had kept in my desk drawer. All of it went into the trash, as if I wanted to erase even the memories. From that moment on, Maura was no longer part of my world. In middle and high school, I immersed myself in my studies as if they were a lifeboat. My parents spoke proudly about the college fund they had saved up, mentioning how they had set aside enough for both of us to get a good education. Once, I overheard Mom on the phone mentioning a sum that was enough to cover 4 years at a state university for each of us. It seemed fair. At the time, I didn't realize that fairness was just an illusion. I worked tirelessly. My SAT scores were nearly perfect, my grades flawless, and my teachers' recommendations glowing. Night after night, I filled out scholarship applications. When the acceptance letters began to arrive, it felt like a dream. Then, one day, I received a letter offering me a full scholarship to the university of my dreams. With trembling hands, I approached my parents, holding the letter tightly. "Mom, Dad, I have great news," I began, trying to hide the nervous excitement in my voice. "They're covering my entire tuition at the university. Everything is paid for." Mom glanced up from her phone, giving me a brief smile. "That's so sweet, dear." I continued, "Since you won't have to spend money on my education, maybe those funds could be used for something else? Like a down payment on an apartment or even starting a small business after I graduate." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad turned off the TV. "What college money?" Mom asked sharply. I froze. "The money you've been saving for our education," I said, my heart pounding faster. Dad cleared his throat. "Sandra, that's our money. We saved it. We decide how it's spent." "But you've always said it was for our college." I protested, my voice shaking. "We're going to use that money for Maura's education," Mom cut in, as though that explained everything. "Tuition is getting more expensive every year. Your sister might need extra support." Their words felt like a verdict. "So because I got a scholarship, I get nothing?" I asked, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. "Life's not fair, Sandra," Dad snapped. "It's not your money to demand." End of discussion. I stormed into my room, tears of anger and betrayal burning in my eyes. The following weeks passed in a haze. My parents acted as though nothing had happened, chatting about graduation preparations and dorm visits. But inside, a growing clarity took hold. I could only rely on myself. Life had proven that to me. That cold November evening, as my phone rang, I was gazing out at the city from the window of my cozy apartment, a glass of wine in hand. Hearing my mother's voice, strangely uncertain and almost timid, I nearly dropped the glass. We hadn't spoken in years, beyond the occasional holiday message. "Sandra," she began, as though testing the waters. "Hi, Mom," I replied calmly, trying to mask my confusion. "How have you been?" Her voice was tense, like she wasn't sure what to say next. "Good. And you?" My tone was as neutral as always. Yes, we're fine. It's been so long since we've seen you," she said hesitantly. "Your dad and I were wondering if you'd like to come home for Christmas. It's in 3 weeks." The invitation caught me off guard. A wave of emotions surged, anger, sadness, exhaustion from the memories. But curiosity, mixed with a sense of duty, proved stronger. "I'll think about it," I said before ending the call. 3 weeks later, I pulled up to my parents' house in my new Mercedes. The November drizzle had turned to snow, coating the streets in a thin white blanket. As I stepped out of the car, I looked at the familiar house, which seemed almost unchanged since the day I left. From the outside, everything looked frozen in time. The old mailbox with its chipped paint, the porch with the same creaky boards. But inside, as I opened the door, the familiar smell hit me, a blend of cinnamon and vanilla, the same scents Mom always used in her Christmas pies. The living room was decorated with garlands, and a tree stood by the fireplace, sparkling with lights. Mora, now a 17-year-old young woman, was sitting on the couch, chatting on the phone. She looked completely different. Her long hair was perfectly styled, her makeup accentuated her features, and her fashionable outfit stood out against the cozy, homey background. Seeing me, she put down the phone and stood up. "Sandra," she said, her voice full of joy, as if no chasm had ever existed between us. "Hi, Mora," I replied, trying to find traces of the little girl she used to be in this confident young woman. She hugged me, but her embrace felt perfunctory. Mom emerged from the kitchen with a tray of hot chocolate. "Sandra, sweetheart. We're so happy to see you," she said, her voice overly cheerful, almost forced. Dad, peeking out from behind his newspaper, gave a curt, "Hi, Sandra," without even standing. His usual aloofness felt like a weight in the room. The evening passed slowly. We sat around the dining table, draped in a red tablecloth and lit by candles, making small talk about unremarkable things. My parents shared updates on their lives, and Mora talked about her college plans. They spoke of her with such pride, as if she were their only child. I ate in silence, occasionally throwing in short comments, feeling like an outsider in this house. Later, when everyone had retreated to their rooms, Mom came to see me. "Sandra, thank you for coming," she said quietly, sitting on the edge of my old bed. "We've missed you." Her words sounded sincere, but I couldn't bring myself to believe them. I looked at her, remembering all the years I'd spent trying to earn her attention, her approval. "Miss me?" I repeated, unable to hide the irony in my voice. "Then why do I only learn about my family's life through Facebook?" Mom averted her eyes, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "Sandra, you left. You chose your own life. We didn't want to bother you." Those words, meant as an excuse, ignited a spark of fury inside me. "Didn't want to bother me?" My voice shook. "Or did you just not care?" Mom stood up, her face darkening. "That's unfair," she said before walking out, leaving me in oppressive silence. The next day, we gathered as a family for the traditional gift exchange. My parents handed me a box containing a designer scarf, while Mora received a brand new smartphone. Once again, I felt the past come alive, its cold hands reaching out to me. The difference in treatment was so blatant that even Mora seemed to notice. Her smile faded for a brief moment. When the evening came to an end, I decided to leave early. The goodbyes were short and strained. Sitting in my car, I felt the pain of everything I had tried to forget reignite inside me. I stood in the office hallway, holding my phone in my hand, unable to process what had just happened. The smell of freshly brewed coffee from the kitchen mixed with the distant hum of voices in the conference room, when my team was discussing a new project. But in that moment, everything felt distant and meaningless. $50,000. Why? How? Why so urgent? I took a deep breath, returned to the conference room, and tried to focus on the presentation, but Mom's words echoed in my head like a haunting refrain. After the meeting, I closed the door to my office, opened my laptop, and immediately logged into my bank account. The recent transfers to my parents' account had gone through without delay, as always. A year and a half of monthly payments of $1,500, a significant sum already. But how could that not be enough? To distract myself, I opened Facebook. Mora, as always, had been posting photos, a recent dinner at a fine dining restaurant, a trendy brunch with friends, yet another designer dress shimmering on her. In the pictures, she looked carefree and happy, her smiling face surrounded by comments from friends admiring her style and lifestyle. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it all. Her supposed life at home clearly didn't match Mom's tales of struggle. Finally, I decided it was time for answers. I dialed Mom's number. She picked up immediately, as if she had been waiting for my call. Sandra, her voice trembled, but this time it wasn't fear, it was some strange mix of guilt and anticipation. Mom, what's going on? Why are you suddenly asking for $50,000? I began, trying to keep my voice calm, but the irritation was unmistakable. She hesitated. Oh, sweetheart, it's just a temporary setback. You know how things are with your dad, the medication, the house repairs, Maura's still looking for work. Mom, I've been sending you money every month. For a year and a half. And it's still not enough? Something doesn't add up, I interrupted, feeling a wave of anger rising. She fell silent again. I could hear her heavy sigh. Maura, she's been overdoing it a bit, but you know how hard it is for her to adjust. She's still young. Young? I let out a bitter laugh. She's 24, Mom. She's an adult. And she shouldn't be living off my money. Mom's tone turned cold and defensive. You don't understand. She's family. We're all supposed to help each other. If you hadn't left, you'd see how hard things are. Those words hit me like a whip. Hadn't left? I nearly shouted. I left because you made it clear that I was just a wallet for Maura. Mom, I need to know where the money is going. If you want me to keep helping, I need explanations. But she had already hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts were tangled, my emotions boiling over. The next morning, I decided it was time to act. I took a day off work and booked the next flight to my hometown. If they wouldn't talk on the phone, I'd figure it out in person. When I arrived at my parents' house, it looked exactly the same. The faded walls, the same water stains on the ceiling, the creaky floor in the entryway. Mom greeted me with a strained smile. Sandra, we weren't expecting you so soon. I wanted to talk in person, I replied, stepping into the living room. Maura, as always, was sitting on the couch with her phone, not even bothering to say hello. She shot me a quick glance and went back to scrolling. Where's Dad? I asked. He's resting in his room, Mom replied, but her voice sounded unsure. I sat down on the same couch where I had so often felt like I didn't belong and looked her straight in the eye. Mom, I want to see all the bills. Everything. For the medication, for the house repairs, for everything you claim is costing money. She paled. Sandra, it's not that simple. Then explain it, I said firmly, refusing to back down. From the couch, Maura scoffed. Why do you always have to make everything so dramatic? It's just money. I turned to her. Money that I earn while you dine at fancy restaurants and buy designer handbags? Do you think I don't see how you're spending the money I send to our parents? Her face twisted in indignation. I'm living my life. Maybe you should relax and stop counting other people's money. Mom intervened, her voice trembling. Sandra, please, don't start. We're a family. A family? I let out a bitter laugh. Mom, if this is a family, then why do I feel like I'm the only one working for it? An oppressive silence filled the room, broken only by the faint ticking of the wall clock. Maura froze, her hand extended, the diamond ring on her finger catching the light. Her face, which moments ago had reflected joyous excitement, changed beyond recognition. Shock turned to anger, and her eyes blazed as though she couldn't believe what she had just heard. What did you say? She growled, stepping back as if I had struck her. I dropped my carry-on bag to the floor, clenched my fists to keep myself from screaming, and said, I said no. I'm not giving you money for your wedding. Not 50,000. Not a single penny. Mom rose from the couch, her face taut like a drawn string. Sandra, sweetheart, you don't understand. No, Mom, you don't understand, I interrupted, cutting her off. I flew across the country thinking Dad was on the brink of death. I worried you couldn't afford his medications, that the house was falling apart. Instead, I find a healthy dad, wedding magazines, and you and Maura discussing a modest $50,000 wedding. Is this your crisis? Dad lowered the magazine he had been holding, as though it could shield him from what was happening. Sandra, let's talk this through calmly, he attempted, but his voice lacked conviction. Maura stepped forward, her voice trembling with rage. Sandra, you have to understand this isn't just about me. It's about our family. It's about how you could support us. You always act like you're better than everyone else with your money and your career. This is our wedding. Do you even understand how long I've been waiting for this moment? I looked at her, feeling everything I had bottled up over the years rise to the surface, ready to explode. Maura, I've been supporting you your entire life. I helped you with your homework, picked you up from school, entertained you while Mom and Dad worked. I went without so you could have everything. I sent money to Mom and Dad every month. And you? Have you ever done anything for anyone but yourself? She stared at me, her face flushed. That's not the same. I'm your sister. Aren't you supposed to help me? I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Help you? Maura, you're an adult. You should be able to stand on your own 2 feet. Do you know what I was doing when I was 24? I was working night shifts at a coffee shop to pay my bills, living in a tiny apartment, and denying myself everything. And you? You live off our parents, flaunt a luxurious lifestyle on social media, and still have the audacity to demand $50,000 from me. No. This ends now. Mom took a step toward me, her face a mixture of disappointment and desperation. Sandra, but we're a family. Don't you see how much this means to us? You can afford it. We just want a little happiness. Is that so much to ask? I turned to her, my resolve only hardening. Mom, happiness isn't a $50,000 wedding. And yes, I can afford it, but that doesn't mean I should. You've taken advantage of my generosity for years, to the point where you've forgotten that gratitude isn't an empty word. You didn't even bother to ask how I'm doing while I've been sending you money. And now you want more? No. Maura clenched her fists, her voice dripping with venom. You're selfish, Sandra. You always have been. You don't care about this family. All you ever do is think about yourself. I took a deep breath, locking eyes with her. Maura, I think about myself because no one else ever did. You all were so busy catering to you that you forgot I have a life too. You want a wedding? Fine. Earn it. But you're not getting anything from me. Mom sank onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. Dad sat there, avoiding my gaze. Maura glared at me, her lips trembling as if she were about to say something, but then she stopped herself. I picked up my carry-on bag, turned toward the door, and walked out without looking back. Outside, I paused, took a deep breath, and felt the weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I sat in my apartment in Turin, staring at my phone screen. Another notification flashed on the display, a long message from Mom, full of reproaches and tearful complaints. I closed it without reading. Beside me, a mug of tea had gone cold, and outside the window, thick clouds hung low in the sky, promising rain. On the kitchen table, My laptop sat open to a draft of my report for a new project, but I couldn't focus. My thoughts kept drifting back to the confrontation at my parents' house. It had been a week since I had walked out, slamming the door behind me. The silence I had gained felt both unnerving and liberating. No one was asking me for money anymore, accusing me of being heartless, or calling with new emergencies. Instead, I received countless messages from relatives who had learned the truth after my outburst. Some condemned me, many supported me, and others stayed silent, perhaps digesting the revelation of how my parents had treated me all my life. I remembered the night when I finally decided to tell the world what had been happening behind the closed doors of our family. That night, with emotions boiling over, I wrote everything down: the years of manipulation, the money I had given away in exchange for the illusion of familial care, the lies I was fed under the guise of necessity. Screenshots of Maura's posts showing expensive purchases and lavish dinners became evidence that could no longer be ignored. I knew it would stir up a storm, but at that moment, I didn't care. I wanted only one thing: to be heard. Now, months later, I was sitting in a cafe with Michael, listening to him talk about his new project in the field of artificial intelligence. His voice was soft yet confident, and his eyes lit up as he spoke about the work he loved. Michael was something new for me, someone who didn't demand, didn't manipulate, and didn't expect more than I could give. He accepted me for who I was, with my boundaries, my pain, and my victories. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing that my thoughts had wandered. I smiled, wrapping my hands around my coffee cup. About how much has changed in the past 6 months. How I finally feel like I'm living for myself. He placed his hand over mine. "You deserve this. You've been through so much to get here. And I'm proud of you." Those simple words made me feel that everything I'd endured hadn't been in vain. For the first time in a long time, I felt like more than a daughter, more than a big sister, more than a wallet for someone else's needs. I felt like just me, Sandra. Sometimes, late at night, I would still see messages from my family flashing in the requests section of my inbox. I didn't read them, but each time, I felt a faint pang in my heart. It wasn't pain or regret, more like a reminder of who I used to be and what I had to do to become who I am now. Aunt Susan, one of the few who had supported me, recently wrote to say that Maura had finally gotten married. Her dream wedding had turned into a dinner at Olive Garden, attended only by our parents, her husband, and his family. No designer outfits, no extravagant jewelry, no pictures to show off on social media. I didn't feel joy at the news, just a quiet sense of relief. Maura had finally been forced to face reality. My parents no longer tried to contact me directly. After their deception was exposed, they had withdrawn into themselves. I thought about them sometimes, but I no longer felt responsible for their lives. It was a freedom I had worked hard to achieve. Life went on. I had just successfully completed a major project at work, and my boss told me I was being considered for a leadership position. My therapist noted that I seemed more confident and at peace. I started planning a trip, not to escape something, but to explore the world. It was a new chapter, one that was finally beginning with me. The little girl who once desperately sought her parents' approval no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who had learned to stand on her own, defend her boundaries, and love herself.